So, let's now find an answer to how to shape the story for different audiences. So, I'm absolutely delighted to hand over now the mic to Nick Booth and his 21 slideshow in 10 minutes. So, it's interesting to see. Nick, rock the floor. Now, over to
Okay,
you.
okay, I should use helium, shouldn't I? Then I can actually get through all these slides. I'm going to go through the PDF that I've got on my desk here. Uh, can people see that? Can people see that?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Right. 21 slides. On your
Yes,
marks. Get
and
set.
go.
Go. Hello. That's a good start. I can't get to my next slide. Bear with me one second. There we go. Um, I'm an old geezer. 40 years ago, I somehow managed to persuade the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to give me a summer job. And I really did go there. There's been a bit of controversy recently about British journalists. But I was there, you can see. I was a younger man. I sat in the Von Karman auditorium, and there was even a story about me in the Daily Mail. I wanted to be a researcher, but I was too stupid. So I ended up doing other stuff instead. And what I actually had that summer in 1981, when Voyager 2 flew past Saturn, was my very own masterclass from these two people. Al Hibbs answered my letter and said, yeah, come out and you can stay at our house. He was the voice of JPL. This is how far we've come. There's lots of different voices, but in those days, nobody did science communication outreach. Al did and was brilliant at it. There's his swimming pool, there's his wife, and there's the greatest theoretical physicist of the 20th century. Quite by accident, I got to meet Richard Feynman, and I am shamelessly going to quote a lot of Feynman to you, because the essence of storytelling he knew. He was a genius in physics, he got a Nobel Prize. He knew the difference between a name of something and knowing something. And that is something that I still see today with a lot of science communication. People just give lots of lists of things, and at the end of it, you don't know anything about the subject than you did at the start. Because I'm old, I'm sort of fairly controversial, and I can say what I want. So if you don't like it, I'm sorry. Um, Storytelling is really important. And again, most of you will have heard of Feynman because of the commission, the presidential commission into that, which is still a horrific thing to look at when Challenger blew up. Feynman was on the podium. He talked about the actual accident and got the O-rings and put them in ice water and found that was really what had happened to Challenger. But as he always used to say, it wasn't what, it was why. Why did this accident happen? And that, the coda to his report, is something for all of you that still bears resemblance today, whether you're a journalist like I was or you're doing marketing. A successful technology, reality must take precedent over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. To put it in my native language, if you're talking bullshit, somebody somewhere will pick that up. It's as true today as it was then, as it is now. Know your audience. Various people have said this today, but I'm saying it in a slightly different way. There's always a lot, and there always has been a lot of navel gazing in the space business. And one thing that you should always remember is you are not your audience. You're trying to get as many people out there as possible to follow this. They don't always follow social media. They certainly don't watch science fiction films, and a lot of activity. It's always seems to me to be the wrong way around. It's not about the public needing to understand science or whatever. It's scientists and engineers and technical people must understand what interests the public, and it's usually something very different to what interests you. The medium dictates the message. You knew there was going to be a plug, and there is, for the book that I've done with Elizabeth Howell about Mars. So I'm just showing you this to show you how the medium affects the message of telling a story. We did a book. There's a piece for the paper I did about 25 years ago, and here is a screen treatment because a producer phoned me and said, "Do you think this could make a film?" I was a little taken aback that I said, "Yeah, could make a comedy drama," because I think some of it is quite funny. What you're doing with all these is trying to simplify. You start with a conversation. Start conversational, then you talk to people, and when you get a book to write a script, this is what you do. You go, tap, all the words fall out. And then there are 20 scenes or 20 images. Think visually and think as simply as you can to tell a story. Keep it simple, KISS. If you keep it simple, that even if the subject itself is complicated, keeping it simple is what you have to do. And there are people in the space industry who I take my hat off to, who make possibly the most interesting subject in the world boring by going off on a tangent, being too technical. The word is the way to start. Start it simply. Doesn't matter what the medium is. You start simply, you build up, because if you write, most people can't write, and most people can't write very well. If you record something and you're speaking, it was very interesting to see Matt's stand out about podcasting. That's the way to do it. We react more to verbal cues than we do to actual writing in storytelling. I was a 00 operative, as you can see, many, many years before Daniel Craig. A lot of people still make the same basic mistake, which is they stand up and they give a lecture. And when you're trying to tell a story, it's not. Now, I always loved in the Bond film where Desmond Llewellyn said, "Now pay attention, 007," and all that. But that was to send it up, because you're not giving a lecture. It's a different set of skills. And again, if you can tell a story as opposed to ranting on it to people, says he, ranting on to people, certain irony here, that's how you do it. Most technical people, as you know, either you're trying to do stuff for them or to get them in front of a camera. Speed is of the essence. Technical writing is, and I'm going to be derogatory about engineers and scientists equally, I'm an equal opportunity insulter. Most technical writing is, I'm using a tube map of London. You start off and you take and stop at every station, because here at this station, we changed the resonance frequency to something else, blah, blah, blah. When you're telling a story, you go from one stop to the other. You've got no time. You have to get from one place to another. It always made me laugh whenever I was doing stuff in newspapers. People would say, "But it's more complicated than that." I know it's more complicated than that. I'm trying to simplify it. Whatever you're doing, give it a groovy name. Now, I'm a big fan of Theodore van Karman, who wrote this seminal paper, which about 5 people probably read, "The Engineer Grapples with Nonlinear Problems." 40 years later, James Glick made a small fortune by writing a book on it called Chaos. Think of a good name. That's partly branding, that's partly marketing, but it's simplifying something that somebody can understand. I was going to show Glunk and Silly, but I'm not with the problems of technology. Here's the point of this. If it doesn't make sense the first time you hear it, it won't make any more sense the next time. I feel for anybody who puts a technical person who will not listen to them to say, "This does not make sense." Glunk and Silly was famously would say, "Oh, I could do an impression, but I'm not." That would just talk gibberish. And always, you need to make sure that you practice on as many people outside of your industry as you can to make the story as universal as possible. Less is more. I'll keep repeating this. What you've got to try and do is to not say more and keep going, is to keep it simplified. Technical people always put too much information, and you don't need that when you're trying to tell a story. Sounds. What I want to do is rather than give you examples of things you can do, is things not to do. Some of you know Timothy West, an actor. There's Sybil Fawlty, his real-life wife. There's their son. He wrote this fantastic play called "The Gun in My Left Hand is Loaded," and it shows you the limitations of writing for podcasts or radio. And it ends up with somebody asking for a drink, and somebody says, "That's a strange drink for a 26-year-old auburn-haired mother of 3. Well, nobody would say that. Yet I still see this kind of nonsense on press releases, and people talk like they don't actually speak. If you're going to learn how to write, certainly for podcasts and radio, talk to people who know what they're doing. It's a very, very specialized skill. A lot of people still in the technical fields, I think, are actually Mary Poppins. They never explain anything. You could give them mind-altering substances and kidnap their children, and they still cannot explain their way out of a paper bag. Sorry, that's something that I've learned. If you can find somebody who can explain something, that is wonderful. If you can't, what you do is what's happened recently in the Queen's Gambit. Now, I couldn't follow chess, it didn't interest me, I don't understand it. But I could watch that because it's the emotional journey of the chess master, or mistress, or whatever you want to call her. She goes through this journey, and that is what storytelling is about. It's the emotional connection when people do this. I'm really sorry to say this, but I'm going to say it. I hate science fiction. I wouldn't have it in the house. The reason is it just doesn't interest me. And a lot of people feel like that. Again, I'm not dissing Daniela, which I thought was a great speech, by the way. It was a great talk, by the way. But a lot of people don't follow science fiction. If you do that, you'll put them off even before you begin. And what I'm going to do here is the only thing I know about Star Wars, which I've never seen, is famously, Harrison Ford said, "You can type this shit, George, but you can't say it." And again, it goes back to this thing. I see it in press releases, I hear it in presentations where people talk gobbledygook. And here it is. He was responsible for perforating the. You can't say that. Show, don't tell. The essence of storytelling is here's a newspaper story, there's a film. It's the difference between writing about the post office or NASA and showing how the journey of a letter. Somebody writes it, they go to the post box. This is in a great film called The Night Mail from the 1930s. I've just been pinged, so I'm going to go to my last slide, final word with Feynman. If you can't explain something to a first year student, you haven't really understood. But if you want to explain something, you have to understand it. Right, 30 seconds. I'm going to say the great thing, looking at all the people here, I get hope for the future. I'm an old geezer, I'm looking at the past. The future is great. There is greater diversity, there's greater voices. Everybody has a story to tell. And if you have something different, a different way of doing it, do it, because somebody somewhere will listen. Here endeth the lesson.
Thank you very much, Nick. You rocked it. Wonderful.